Hi guys, welcome to another video. I suppose you clicked on this video because maybe you're already familiar with my Trying to Solve Agatha Christie Murder Mysteries series on my channel. Now, if you know, then you know that I have so far tried to solve as I was reading for Hercule Poirot novels, and in the comment sections of those videos, a lot of people have been recommending like future books to do this on. And a lot of people have also been requesting that I do this kind of format on a Miss Marple novel. And now guys, I don't want you to misunderstand. I don't want you to think that I'm only doing this on Hercule Poirot because I don't like Miss Marple. Not at all. It is actually kind of like the opposite. Like these days, I wouldn't differentiate anymore. I like Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple equal amounts, but I definitely used to prefer Miss Marple, and that is why I have already read all Miss Marple novels. So of course I cannot do a kind of video like this anymore, as in like reading a book for the first time and trying to solve it as I'm reading it, because I have already read all Miss Marple novels. So I've been kind of thinking, because I would love to give Miss Marple some room on my channel as well, but obviously I can't do it in the same format I'm doing these other videos on Hercule Poirot novels that I haven't read yet. So I've been thinking, and the thing is, with some of the Miss Marple novels, if you said to me right now, tell me what the solution is of a body in the library, I would be like, dude, I don't know anymore. It's been quite a while since I read it. Because some of the Miss Marple novels I have reread several times because they are like some of my favorite novels. Those are Murders Announced and 13 Problems in particular. Those two, I would say, are my two favorite Miss Marple novels. I have reread them a bunch of times. With those, I definitely know every single piece of the solutions. But with a lot of the other ones, I have only read them once or maybe twice, but like years ago, and I like honestly don't remember anymore. A Caribbean Affair, what was that about again? I don't really remember. So I thought that maybe could this be a future segment in this little series, that with the Miss Marple novels, I read them again, but because I have read them before and probably at some point in the story I will remember again how everything worked out and like how everyone was connected and what the solution was, I have to give you my guess as to what the solution is after having read only like a fourth or a third of the novel. Is that a segment we could try out? I am not really sure myself yet. As you can probably tell, I'm kind of insecure about the idea, but I wanted to present this possibility to you in this video, and you can let me know down in the comments if you think that that could work out maybe. I mean, obviously, if I, after one chapter, remember what the solution is, then I would have to do it like on another book. But right now, I can't really think of like another way, shape, or form I could include Miss Marple novels in this series because I've already read them. But again, trying to solve them with only like parts of the information after only like a third of the book, that might work out, because like with a lot of them right now, I seriously have no idea of what the story was even about, and not even talking about who was the murderer. Anyway, so that's my proposition. Let me know what you think about it. In this video, I want to already give it a little try, and you can then already tell me if you enjoyed this or not. And we're going to try to do this with Miss Marple's final cases. Now, within the Miss Marple series, there are two short story collections. One is 13 Problems, 13 short stories, and then there are Miss Marple's final cases. There are, I think, 9 short stories in this one. Now, as I just mentioned, the 13 Problems book collection is one of my favorite Miss Marple novels. So with those short story collections, I do remember all of those. But to be really honest, this one, I have like no recollection of this book. I am very sure that this was the last Miss Marple. By the way, on the back you can see all Miss Marple novels. This was the last Miss Marple book I ever picked up. And I mean, I must have read it when I picked it up. But even just like looking at the titles of the short stories, I don't remember any of them. So I thought, because these are short stories, we can give this a quick little try if this setup will work out. Let's see, do I remember once I start reading? Don't I? And I can just give you my little guess as to who I think the murderer was before the story comes to an end. So what I want to do right now is I'm going to read you, I'd say, just like the first story, which is called Sanctuary. And well, before it comes to a close, now before we reach the end, this is where the second story starts, I have to give you my guess as to who the murderer is. Now let's see how long this is going to take, because obviously these are short stories, so you would think these kind of videos would be way shorter, but then reading a story out loud to a camera, it takes way longer than if I just read this myself silently. So without any further ado, let's jump right into this, shall we? So here we go. Mind you, I am not a professional like reader, audiobook reader, whatever. So I hope you enjoy this experience of me reading this to you. If you don't, well, you don't. Okay, let's start. Sanctuary. The vicar's wife came around the corner of the vicarage with her arms full of chrysanthemums. Those flowers, I have come across them in another one of these novels, and I don't like them. A good deal of rich garden soil was attached to her strong brogue shoes, and a few fragments of earth were adhering to her nose, but of that fact she was perfectly unconscious. She had a slight struggle in opening the vicarage gate, which hung rustily half of its hinges. A puff of wind caught at the battered felt hat, causing it to sit even more rakishly than it had done before. "Bother," said Bunch. Ah, Bunch and Harmon, they are featured in... I'm pretty sure in the A Murder is Announced story. But one of them dies in that story. Sorry, spoiler. Okay, let's go on. Christened by her optimistic parents, Diana, Mrs. Harmon had become Bunch at an early age for somewhat obvious reasons, and the name had stuck to her ever since. Clutching the chrysanthemums, she made her way through the gate to the churchyard and so to the church door. The November air was mild and damp. Inside, the church was dark and cold. It was unheated except at the service times. "Brr," said Bunch expressively. "I'd better get on with this quickly. I don't want to die of cold." With the quickness born of practice, she collected the necessary paraphernalia: vases, water, flower holders. "I wish we had lilies," thought Bunch to herself. "I get so tired of these scraggy chrysanthemums. What the hell? One page into the story, already 3 times these damn stupid flowers." Okay, her nimble fingers arranged blooms in their holders. There was nothing particularly original or artistic about the decorations, for Bunch Harmon herself was neither original nor artistic, but it was a homely and pleasant arrangement. Carrying the vases carefully, Bunch stepped up the aisle and made her way towards the altar. As she did so, the sun came out. I think she discovered someone. I mean, these are murder mysteries. Obviously, she's gonna discover like a body now, but I think someone's hanging there even. Do I already remember this? I'm not sure. It showed through the east window of somewhat crude colored glass, mostly blue and red, the gift of a wealthy Victorian churchgoer. The effect was almost startling in its sudden opulence. Like jewels, thought Bunch. Suddenly she stopped, staring ahead of her. On the chancel steps was a huddled dark form. Okay, no one hanging, but someone being huddled. Putting down the flowers carefully, Bunch went up to it and bent over it. It was a man lying there, huddled over on himself. Okay, no, let's continue. Bunch knelt down by him and slowly, carefully, she turned him over. Her fingers went to his pulse, a pulse so feeble and fluttering that it told its own story, as did the almost greenish pallor of his face. There was no doubt, Bunch thought, that the man was dying. He was a man of about 45, dressed in a dark, shabby suit. She laid down the limp hand she had picked up and looked at his other hand. This seemed clenched like a fist on his breast. Looking more closely, she saw that the fingers were closed over what seemed to be a large wad or handkerchief, which he was holding tightly to his chest. All round the clenched hand, there were splashes of dry brown fluid. Up till now, the man's eyes had been closed, but at this point, they suddenly opened and fixed themselves on Bunch's face. They were neither dazed nor wondering. They seemed fully alive and intelligent. His lips moved, and Bunch went forward to catch the words, or rather, the word. It was only one word that he said: sanctuary. There was, she thought, just a very faint smile as he breathed out this word. There was no mistaking it, for after a moment he said it again: sanctuary. Then, with a faint, long-drawn-out sigh, his eyes closed again. Once more, Bunch's fingers went to his pulse. It was still there, but fainter now and more intermittent. She got up with decision. "Don't move," she said, "or try to move. I'm going for help." The man's eyes opened again, but he seemed now to be fixing his attention on the colored light that came through the east window. He murmured something the Bunch could not quite catch. She thought, startled, that it might have been her husband's name. "Julian?" she said. "Did you come here to find Julian?" But there was no answer. The man lay with eyes closed, his breathing coming in slow, shallow fashion. "Ah, she's the vicar's wife?" It literally said that in the first sentence, and I had already forgotten. We're off to a good start. Okay, but there was no answer. The man lay with eyes closed, his breathing coming in shallow, slow fashion. Bunch turned and left the church rapidly. She glanced at her watch and nodded with some satisfaction. Dr. Griffith would still be in the surgery. It was only a couple of minutes' walk from the church. She went in without waiting to knock or ring, passing through the waiting room and into the doctor's surgery. "You must come at once," said Bunch. "There's a man dying in the church." Some minutes later, Dr. Griffith rose from his knees after a brief examination. "Can we move him from here into the vicarage? I can attend to him better there, not that it's any use." "Of course," said Bunch. "I'll go along and get things ready. I'll get Harper and Jones, shall I, to help you carry him?" "Thanks. I can telephone from the..." I think the telephone is an important clue. "I can telephone from the vicarage for an ambulance, but I'm afraid by the time it comes..." He left the remark unfinished. Bunch said, "Internal bleeding?" Dr. Griffith nodded. He said, "How on earth did he come here?" "I think he must have been here all night," said Bunch, considering. "Harper unlocks the church in the morning as he goes to work, but he doesn't usually come in." It was about 5 minutes later when Dr. Griffith put down the telephone receiver and came back into the morning room, where the injured man was lying on quickly arranged blankets on the sofa. Bunch was moving a basin of water and clearing up after the doctor's examination. "Well, that's that," said Griffith. "I sent for an ambulance and I've notified the police." He stood frowning, looking down at the patient who lay with closed eyes. His left hand was plucking in a nervous, spasmodic way at his side. "He was shot," said Griffith, "shot at fairly close quarters." He rolled his handkerchief up into a ball and plugged the wound with it so as to stop the bleeding. "Could he have gone far after that happened?" Bunch asked. "Oh yes, it's quite possible. A mortally wounded man has been known to pick himself up and walk along the street as though nothing had happened, and then suddenly collapse 5 or 10 minutes later. So he needn't have been shot in the church. Oh no. He may have been shot some distance away. Of course he may have shot himself and then dropped the revolver and staggered blindly towards the church. I don't quite know why he made for the church and not for the vicarage." "Oh, I know that," said Bunch. "He said sanctuary." The doctor stared at her. "Sanctuary?" "Here's Julian," says Bunch, turning her head as she heard her husband's steps in the hall. "Julian, come here." The Reverend Julian Harmon entered the room. His vague, scholarly manner always made him appear much older than he really was. "Dear me," said Julian Harmon, staring in a mild, puzzled manner at the surgical appliances and the prone figure on the sofa. Bunch explained with her usual economy of words. "He was in the church, dying. He'd been shot. Do you know him, Julian? I thought he said your name." The vicar came up to the sofa and looked down at the dying man. "Poor fellow," he said and shook his head. "No, I don't know him. I'm almost sure I've never seen him before." I wonder if, what's her name? Beth Harmon? Bunch. I wonder if she understood the word correctly. Maybe he was saying not sanctuary, but something else, and that's like a clue. Anyway, at that moment, the dying man's eyes opened once more. They went from the doctor to Julian Harmon and from him to his wife. His eyes stayed there, staring into Bunch's face. Griffith stepped forward. "If you could tell us," he said urgently. But with his eyes fixed on Bunch, the man said in a weak voice, "Please, please." And then, with a slight tremor, he died. Sergeant Hayes licked his pencil and turned the page of his notebook. "So that's all you can tell me, Mrs. Harmon?" "That's all," said Bunch. These are the things out of his coat pockets. On a table at Sergeant Hayes' elbow was a wallet, a rather battered old watch with the initials W.S. and the return half of a ticket to London, nothing more. "You found out who he is?" asked Bunch. "A Mr. and Mrs. Eccles phoned up the station. He's a brother, it seems, name of Sanborn, been in a low state of health and nerves for some time. He's been getting worse lately. The day before yesterday, he walked out and didn't come back. He took a revolver with him." "And he came out here and shot himself with it?" said Bunch. "Why?" "Well, you see, he'd been depressed." Bunch interrupted him. "I don't mean that. I mean, why here?" Since Sergeant Hayes obviously did not know the answer to that one, he replied in an oblique fashion. "Come out here, he did, on the 5:10 bus." "Yes," said Bunch again, "but why?" "I don't know, Mrs. Harmon," said Sergeant Hayes. "There's no accounting if the balance of the mind is disturbed." Bunch finished for him. "They may do it anywhere. They are, like, the way they talk about suicide here. But it still seems to me unnecessary to take a bus out to a small country place like this. He didn't know anyone here, did he?" "Not so far as I can be certain," said Sergeant Hayes. He coughed in an apologetic manner and said, as he rose to his feet, "It may be as Mr. and Mrs. Eccles will come out and see you, ma'am, if you don't mind, that is." "Of course I don't mind," said Bunch. "It's very natural. I only wish I had something to tell them." "I'll be getting along," said Sergeant Hayes. A car had driven up the vicarage gate. Sergeant Hayes, glancing at it, remarked, "Looks as though it's Mr. and Mrs. Eccles come here now, ma'am, to talk with you." Bunch braced herself to endure what she felt might be rather a difficult ordeal. However, she thought, I can always call Julian to help. A clergyman's a great help when people are bereaved. Exactly what she had expected Mr. and Mrs. Eccles to be like, Bunch could not have said, but she was conscious as she greeted them of a feeling of surprise. Mr. Eccles was a stout-florid man whose natural manner would have been cheerful. Mrs. Eccles had a vaguely fleshy look about her. She had a small, mean, pursed-up mouth. Her voice was thin and reedy. It's been a terrible shock, Mrs. Harmon. Okay, no, I can't. I can't change my voices. As you can imagine, she said. Oh, I know, said Bunch. It must have been. Do sit down. Can I offer you, well, perhaps a little early tea? Mr. Eccles waved a podgy hand. No, nothing for us, he said. It's very kind of you, I'm sure. Just wanted to, well, what poor William said and all that, you know? He's been abroad a long time, said Mrs. Eccles, and I think he must have had some very nasty experiences. Very quiet and depressed he's been ever since he came home. Since the world wasn't fit to live in and there was nothing to look forward to. Poor Bill, he was always moody. She calls him Bill right now, but I wonder, his initials are WS. If it turns out that his name wasn't William, because like if his name is William, then his nickname would be Bill. But if it turns out that his name was actually something else started with a W, then these people are obviously lying. They didn't really know him, or is maybe some secret service or something involved. I wonder. Bunch stared at them both for a moment or two without speaking. Pinched my husband's revolver, did he? Went on Mrs. Eccles, without our knowing. Then it seems he came here by bus. I suppose it was a nice feeling on his part. He wouldn't have liked to do it in our house. Poor fellow, said Mr. Eccles with a sigh. It doesn't do to judge. There was another short pause, and Mr. Eccles said, Did he leave a message? Any last words? Nothing like that? That's suspicious how these two are acting. His bright, rather pig-like eyes watched Bunch closely. Mrs. Eccles, too, leaned forward as though anxious for the reply. No, said Bunch quietly. He came into the church when he was dying, for sanctuary. Mrs. Eccles said in a puzzled voice, Sanctuary? I don't think I quite... Mr. Eccles interrupted. Holy place, my dear. He said impatiently, That's what the vicar's wife means. It's a sin, suicide, you know. I expect he wanted to make amends. He tried to say something just before he died, said Bunch. He began, Please, but that's as far as he got. Mrs. Eccles put her handkerchief to her eyes and sniffed. Oh dear, she said. It's terribly upsetting, isn't it? There, Pam, said her husband. Don't take on. These things can't be helped. Poor Willie. Still, he's at peace now. Well, thank you very much, Mrs. Harmon. I hope we haven't interrupted you. A vicar's wife is a busy lady. We know that. They shook hands with her. Then Eccles turned back suddenly to say, Oh yes, there's just one other thing. I think you've got his coat here, haven't you? His coat? Bunch frowned. Mrs. Eccles said, We'd like all his things, you know, sentimental-like. He had a watch and a wallet and a railway ticket in his pocket, said Bunch. I gave them to Sergeant Hayes. That's all right then, said Mr. Eccles. He'll hand them over to us, I expect. His private papers would be in the wallet. There was a pound note in the wallet, said Bunch. Nothing else? No letters? Nothing like that? Bunch shook her head. Well, thank you, Mrs. Harmon. The coat he was wearing, perhaps. The sergeant's got that too, has he? Bunch frowned in an effort of remembrance. No, she said. I don't think... Let me see. The doctor that took his coat off to examine his wound. She looked round the room vaguely. I must have taken it upstairs with the towels and the basin. I wonder now, Mrs. Harmon, if you don't mind, we like his coat, you know, the last thing he wore. Well, the wife feels rather sentimental about it. Of course, said Bunch. Would you like me to have it cleaned first? I'm afraid it's rather, well, stained. Oh, no, that doesn't matter. Bunch frowned. Now, I wonder where... Excuse me a moment. She went upstairs and was some few minutes before she returned. I'm so sorry, she said breathlessly. My daily woman must have put it aside with our other clothes that were going to the cleaners. It's taken me quite a long time to find. Here it is. I'll do it up for you in brown paper. I wonder if I think maybe the doctor has something to do with it. Maybe he recognized him or something, and he hit the code? I don't know. Disclaiming the protest, she did so. Then once more effusively bidding her farewell, the Eccleses departed. Bunch went slowly back across the hall and entered the study. The Reverend Julian Harmon looked up and his brow cleared. He was composing a sermon and was fearing that he had been led astray by the interest of the political relations between Judea and Persia. Yes, dear, he said hopefully. Julian, said Bunch, what's sanctuary exactly? Julian Harmon gratefully put aside his sermon paper. Well, he said. Sanctuary in Roman and Greek temples applied to the cella, in which stood the statue of a god. The Latin word for altar, era, also means protection. He continued learnedly. In 395 AD, the right of sanctuary in Christian churches was finally and definitely recognized. The earliest mention of the right of sanctuary in England is in the Code of Laws issued by Ethelbert in AD 600. He continued for some time with his exposition, but was, as often, disconcerted by his wife's reception of his erudite pronouncements. Darling, she said, you are sweet. Bending over, she kissed him on the tip of his nose. The Eccleses have been here, said Blanche. The vicar frowned. The Eccleses? I don't seem to remember. You don't know them. The sister and her husband of the man in the church. My dear, you ought to have called me. There wasn't any need, said Blanche. They were not in need of consolation. I wonder now. She frowned. If I put a casserole in the oven tomorrow, can you manage, Julian? I think I should go up to London for the sales. The sales? Her husband looked at her blankly. Do you mean a yacht or a boat or something? Punch laughed. No, darling. There's a special white sale at Burris and Portman's. You know, sheets, tablecloths, and towels, and glasscloths. I don't know what we do with our glasscloths the way that we're through. Besides, she added thoughtfully, I think I ought to go and see Aunt Jane. Ah, Miss Marple is your aunt. She's not in the other book, though. Anyway, it doesn't matter. That sweet old lady, Miss Jane Marple, was enjoying the delights of the metropolis for a fortnight, comfortably installed in her nephew's studio flat. So kind of dear Raymond, she murmured. He and Joan have gone to America for a fortnight, and they insisted I should come up here and enjoy myself. And now, dear Bunch, do tell me what it is that's worrying you. Bunch was Miss Marple's favorite godchild, and the old lady looked at her with a great affection as Bunch, thrusting her best felt hat farther on the back of her head, started her story. Bunch's recital was concise and clear. Miss Marple nodded her head as Bunch finished. I see, she said. Yes, I see. That's why I felt I had to see you, said Bunch. You see, not being clever, but you are clever, my dear. No, I'm not. Not clever like Julian. Julian, of course, has a very solid intellect, said Miss Marple. That's it, said Bunch. Julian's got the intellect, but on the other hand, I've got the sense. You have a lot of common sense, Bunch, and you're very intelligent. You see, I don't really know what I ought to do. I can't ask Julian because, Julian's so full of rectitude. This statement appeared to be perfectly understood by Miss Marple, who said, I know what you mean, dear. We women, well, it's different, she went on. You told me what happened, Bunch, but I'd like to know first exactly what you think. It's all wrong, said Bunch. The man who was there in the church dying knew all about sanctuary. He said it just the way Julian would have said it. He was a well-read, educated man. And if he'd shot himself, he wouldn't drag himself to a church afterwards and say sanctuary. Sanctuary means that you're pursued. And when you get into a church, you're safe. Your pursuers can't touch you. At one time, even the law couldn't get at you. She looked questioningly at Miss Marple. The latter nodded. Bunch went on. Those people, the Eccleses, were quite different, ignorant and coarse. And there's another thing. That watch, the dead man's watch, it had the initials WS on the back of it, but inside, I opened it, in very small lettering, there was to Walter from his father, and a date, Walter, but the Eccleses kept talking of him as William or Bill. Ha! Saw that one. But the thing is, do I remember those details, or do I pick up on them? Because I have read so many detective stories, some things, maybe they're obvious clues to me. I don't know, let's continue. Miss Marple seemed about to speak, but Bunch rushed on. Oh, I know, you're not always called the name you're baptized by. I can understand that you might be christened William and called Porgy or Carrot or something, but your sister wouldn't call you William or Bill if your name was Walter. You mean that she wasn't his sister? I'm quite sure she wasn't his sister. They were horrid, both of them. They came to the vicarage to get his things and to find out if he had said anything before he died. When I said he hadn't, I saw it in their faces. Relief. I think myself, finished Bunch, it was Eccles who shot him. Murder? Said Miss Marples. Yes, said Bunch. Murder. That's why I came to you, darling. Bunch's remark might have seemed incongruous to an ignorant listener, but in certain spheres Miss Marple had a reputation for dealing with murder. He said please to me before he died, said Bunch. He wanted me to do something for him. The awful thing is, I have no idea what. Miss Marple considered for a moment or two, and then pounced on the point that had already occurred to Bunch. But why was he there at all? She asked. You mean, said Bunch, if you wanted sanctuary, you might pop into a church anywhere. There's no need to take a bus that only goes 4 times a day and come to a lonely spot like ours for it. Maybe this guy, like his sister or whoever that person actually is, she said that he had been abroad. Maybe he was some sort of soldier, and before he had gone off to some place or other, he hid something in the churchyard, like some jewels, some secret papers or whatever, and after all this time he came back to get them, but someone was following him and shot him and then went off with like these papers, and he crawled into the church. Something like that. Sounds pretty good, I think. Anyway, Miss Marple considered for a moment or two. He must have come there for a purpose, Miss Marple thought. He must have come to see someone. Chipping Clackhorn's not a big place, Bunch. Surely you must have some idea of who it was he came to see. Bunch reviewed the inhabitants of her village in her mind before rather doubtfully shaking her head. In a way, she said, it could be anybody. He never mentioned a name. He said Julian, or I thought he said Julian. It might have been Julia, I suppose. As far as I know, there isn't any Julia living in Chipping Clackhorn. She screwed her eyes as she thought back to the scene. The man lying on the chancel steps. The light coming through the windows with the jewels of red and blue light. Jewels, said Bunch suddenly. Perhaps that's what he had said. The light coming through the east windows looked like jewels. Jewels, said Mrs. Marple thoughtfully. I'm coming now, said Bunch, to the most important thing of all, the reason why I've really come here today. You see, the Eccleses made a great fuss about having his coat. We took it off when the doctor was seeing him. It was an old, shabby sort of coat. There was no reason they should have wanted it. They pretended it was sentimental, but that was nonsense. Anyway, I went up to find it, and as I was just going up the stairs, I remembered how he'd made a kind of picking gesture with his hand, as though he was fumbling with the coat. So when I got hold of the coat, I looked at it very carefully, and I saw that in one place the lining had been sewn up again with a different thread. So I unpicked it, and I found a little piece of paper inside. I took it out, and I sewed it up again. I was careful, and I don't really think that the Eccleses would know I've done it. I don't think so, but I can't be sure. And I took the coat down to them, and made some excuses for the delay. The piece of paper? Asked Miss Marple. Bunch opened the handbag. I didn't show it to Julian, she said, because he would have said that I ought to have given it to the Eccleses, but I thought I'd rather bring it to you instead. A cloakroom ticket, said Miss Marple, looking at it. Paddington Station. He had a return ticket to Paddington in his pocket, said Bunch. The eyes of the two women met. This calls for action, said Miss Marple briskly, but it would be advisable, I think, to be careful. Would you have noticed at all, Bunch, dear, whether you were followed when you came to London today? Followed? Exclaimed Bunch. You don't think... Well, I think it's possible, said Miss Marple. When anything is possible, I think we ought to take precautions. You came up here ostensibly, my dear, to go to the sales. I think the right thing to do, therefore, would be for you to go to the sales. But before we set out, we might put on 1 or 2 little arrangements in hand. I don't suppose, Miss Marple added obscurely, that I shall need the old speckled tweed with the beaver collar just at present. It was about an hour and a half later that the two ladies, rather the worse for wear, battered in appearance, and both clasping parcels of household linen, sat down at a small and sequestered hostelry called the Apple Bow to restore their forces with steak and kidney pudding, followed by apple tart and custard. A smart young woman with a lavish application of rouge and lipstick entered the Apple Bow at that moment. After looking around vaguely for a moment or two, she hurried to the table. She laid down an envelope by Miss Marple's elbow. There you are, miss, she said briskly. Oh, thank you, Gladys, said Miss Marple. Thank you very much. So kind of you. Always pleased to oblige, ma'am, I'm sure, said Gladys. Ernie always says to me, everything what's good you'll learn from that Miss Marple of yours that you were in service with. And I'm sure I'm always glad to oblige, miss. Such a dear girl, said Miss Marple as Gladys departed again, always so willing and so kind. She looked inside the envelope and then passed it on to Bunch. Now be careful, dear, she said. By the way, is there still that nice young inspector at Melchester that I remember? I don't know, said Bunch. I expect so. Well, if not, said Miss Marple thoughtfully, I can always ring up the chief constable. I think he would remember me. Of course he would remember you, said Bunch. Everybody would remember you. You're quite unique. She rose. Arrived at Paddington, Bunch went to the luggage office. Now, which envelope did that maid deliver? I thought that I thought they would have made the maid go to Paddington Station to look inside that locker, but it seems like Bunch is now going there. Arrived at Paddington, Bunch went to the luggage office and produced the cloakroom ticket. A moment or two later, a rather shabby old suitcase was passed across to her, and carrying this, she made her way to the platform. The journey home was uneventful. Bunch rose as the train approached Chipping Clachan and picked up the old suitcase. She had just left her carriage when the man sprinting along the platform suddenly seized the suitcase from her hand and rushed off with it. "Stop!" Bunch yelled. Stop him, he's taken my suitcase." The ticket collector, who at this railway station was a man of somewhat slow processes, had just begun to say, "Now look here, you can't do that," when a smart blow on the chest pushed him aside and the man with the suitcase rushed out from the station. He made his way towards a waiting car. Tossing the suitcase in, he was about to climb after it, but before he could move, a hand fell on his shoulder, and the voice of Police Constable Abel said, "Now then, what's all this?" Bunch arrived panting from the station. "He snatched my suitcase," she said. "Nonsense," said the man. "I don't know what this lady means. It's my suitcase. I just got off the train with it." "Now let's get this clear," said Police Constable Abel. "You say, madam, that this is your suitcase?" said Police Constable Abel. "Yes," said Bunch, "definitely. And you, sir?" "I say this suitcase is mine." The man was tall, dark, and well-dressed, with a drawling voice and a superior manner. A feminine voice from inside the car said, "Of course it's your suitcase, Edwin. I don't know what this woman means." Okay, sorry. Let's go on. "We'll have to get this clear," said Police Constable Abel. "If it's your suitcase, madam, what do you say is inside it?" "Clothes," said Bunch. "A long speckled coat with a beaver collar, 2 wool jumpers, and a pair of shoes." "Well, that's clear enough," said Police Constable Abel. He turned to the other. "I am a theatrical costumer," said the dark man importantly. "This suitcase contains theatrical properties, which I brought down here for an amateur performance." "Right," said Police Constable Abel. "Well, we'll just look inside, shall we, and see." "It'll suit me," said the dark man. "My name is Moss, by the way. Edwin Moss." The police constable holding the suitcase went back into the station. Police Constable Abel laid the suitcase on the counter of the parcel office and pushed back the clasp. The case was not locked. Bunch and Mr. Edwin Moss stood on either side of him, their eyes regarding each other vengefully. "Ah," said Police Constable Abel as he pushed up the lid. Inside, neatly folded, was a long, rather shabby tweed coat with a beaver fur collar. There was also 2 wool jumpers and a pair of country shoes. "Exactly as you said, madam," said Police Constable Abel, turning to Bunch. "I do apologize," he said. "I really do apologize. Please believe me, my dear lady, when I tell you how very, very sorry I am. Unpardonable, quite unpardonable, my behavior has been. I must rush now. Probably my suitcase has gone on the train." Raising his head once more, he said meltingly to Bunch, Do forgive me," and rushed hurriedly out of the parcels office. "Are you going to let him get away?" asked Bunch to Police Constable Abel. "He won't get too far, madam," he said. "That's to say, he won't get far unobserved, if you take my meaning." "Oh," said Bunch, relieved. "Shouldn't wonder if the inspector sergeant was out to see you about it tomorrow morning." So obviously, what I think has happened is they probably sent the maid Gladys to this like locker station at Paddington Station and like switched the suitcases and put like this, let's say, innocent suitcase in there that Bunch then later picked up, got on the train, and that was almost stolen from her. But the original suitcase, where there are maybe jewels or whatever inside, the Gladys took with her, and she told Miss Marple in like this envelope that she gave her where she has deposited it or something. And yeah, I think this is about that this man came back from abroad and he had hid this somewhere and people were watching him and all of that. Okay. By the way, I'm not sure. I don't remember the story. Like this thing with like William, Bill, Walter, I think I did not like remember that, and that's why I picked up on it, but that seemed fairly obvious. Anyway, it was the inspector who came, the Inspector Craddock, who Miss Marple remembered. He greeted Bunch with a smile as an old friend. "Crime and Chipping Clachan again," he said cheerfully. "You don't lack for sensation here, do you, Mrs. Harmer?" "I could do with rather less," said Bunch. "Have you come to ask me questions, or are you going to tell me things for a change?" "I'll tell you something first. said the inspector. To begin with, Mr. and Mrs. Eccles have been having an eye kept on them for some time. There's reason to believe they've been connected with several robberies in this part of the world. For another thing, although Mrs. Eccles has a brother called Sanborn, who has recently come back from abroad, the man you found dying in the church yesterday was definitely not Sanborn. I knew that he wasn't, said Bunch. His name was Walter to begin with, not William. The inspector nodded. His name was Walter St. John, and he escaped 48 hours ago from Charrington Prison. Didn't see that one coming. Of course, said Bunch softly to herself. He was being hunted down by the law and he took sanctuary. Then she asked, what had he done? I'll have to go back rather a long way. It's a complicated story. Several years ago, there was a certain dancer doing turns at the music halls. I don't expect you'll have ever heard of her, but she specialized in an Arabian night turn, Aladdin in the Cave of Jewels, it was called. She wore bits of rhinestone and not much else. She wasn't much of a dancer, I believe, but she was, well, attractive. Anyway, a certain royalty fell for her in a big way. Amongst other things, he gave her a very magnificent emerald necklace. The historic jewels of a Raja? murmured Bunch ecstatically. Inspector Craddock coughed. Well, a rather more modern version, Mrs. Harmon. The affair didn't last very long. Zobeida, to give the dancer her stage name, hung onto the necklace, and in due course it was stolen. It disappeared from her dressing room at the theatre, and there was a lingering suspicion in the minds of the authorities that she herself might have engineered its disappearance. The necklace was never recovered, but during the course of the investigation, the attention of the police was drawn to this man, Walter St. John. He was a man of education and breeding who had come down in the world and who was employed as a working jeweller with a rather obscure firm which was suspected of acting as a fence for jewel robberies. There was evidence that this necklace had passed through his hands. It was, however, in connection with the theft of some other jewelry that he was finally brought to trial and convicted and sent to prison. He had not very much long to serve, so his escape was rather a surprise. But why did he come here? Asked Bunch. We'd like to know that very much, Mrs. Harmon. Following up his trial, he seems that he went first to London. He didn't visit any of his old associates, but he visited an elderly woman, a Mrs. Jacobs, who had formerly been a theatrical dresser. She won't say a word of what he came for, but according to other lodgers in the house, he left carrying a suitcase. I see, said Bunch. He left it in the cloakroom at Paddington, and then he came down here. By that time, said Inspector Craddock, Eccles and the man who called himself Edwin Moss were on his trail. They wanted that suitcase. They saw him get on the bus. They must have driven out in a car ahead of him and been waiting for him when he left the bus. And he was murdered? Said Bunch. Yes, said Craddock. He was shot. It was Eccles's revolver, but I rather fancy it was Moss who did the shooting. Now, Mrs. Harmon, what we want to know is where's the suitcase that Walter St. John actually deposited at Paddington Station? Bunch grinned. I expect Aunt Jane's got it by now, she said. Miss Marple, I mean. That was her plan. She sent a former maid of hers with a suitcase packed with her things to a cloakroom at Paddington, and we exchanged tickets. I collected her suitcase, brought it down by train. She seemed to expect that an attempt would be made to get it from me. It was Inspector Craddock's turn to grin. So she said when she rang up. I'm driving up to London to see her. Do you want to come too, Mrs. Harmon? Well, said Bunch, considering... As a matter of fact, it's very fortunate. I had toothache last night, so I really ought to go to London to see the dentist, oughtn't I? Definitely, said Inspector Craddock. Miss Marple looked from Inspector Craddock's face to the eager face of Bunch Harmon. The suitcase lay on the table. Of course I haven't opened it, said the old lady. I wouldn't dream of doing such a thing until some official arrived. Besides, she said, with a demurely mischievous Victorian smile, it's locked. Like to make a guess at what's inside, Miss Marple? Asked the inspector. I should imagine, you know, said Miss Marple, there would be Zobeida's theatrical costumes. Would you like a chisel, Inspector? The chisel soon did its work. Both women gave a slight gasp as the lid flew up. The sunlight coming through the window lit up what seemed like an inexhaustible treasure of sparkling jewels, red, blue, green, orange. Aladdin's cave, said Miss Marple, the flashing jewels the girl wore to dance. Ah, said Inspector Craddock. Now, what's so precious about it, do you think, that a man was murdered to get hold of it? She was a shrewd girl, I expect, said Miss Marple thoughtfully. She's dead, isn't she, Inspector? Yes, died 3 years ago. She has this valuable emerald necklace, said Miss Marple musingly. Had the stones taken out of their setting and fastened here and there on her theatrical costume. where everyone would take them for merely colored rhinestones. Then she had a replica made of the real necklace, and that of course was what's stolen. No wonder it never came on the market. The thieves soon discovered the stones were false. Here's an envelope, said Bunch, pulling aside some of the glittered stones. Inspector Craddock took it from her and extracted 2 official-looking papers from it. He read aloud, "Marriage certificate between Walter Edmund St. John and Mary Moss." That was Sabader's real name. Ah, so he was the husband. Okay. So they were married, said Miss Marple. I see. What's the other? Asked Bunch. A birth certificate of a daughter called Jewel? Wait, what? Okay. Jewel, cried Bunch. Why, of course, Jewel, Jill. That's it. I see now why he came to Chipping Clachan. That's what he was trying to say to me. Jewel. The Mundys, you know, Labenham Cottage. They look after a little girl for someone. They're devoted to her. She's been like their own granddaughter. Yes, I remember now. Her name was Jewel, only of course they call her Jill. Mrs. Mundy had a stroke about a week ago, and the old man's been very ill. They were both going to the infirmary. I've been trying hard to find a good home for Jill somewhere. I didn't want her taken away to an institution. I suppose her father heard about it in prison, and he managed to break away and get hold of the suitcase from the old dresser he or his wife left it with. I suppose if the jewels really belong to her mother, they can be used for the child now. I should imagine so, Mrs. Harmond, if they're here. Oh, they'll be here all right, said Mrs. Marple cheerfully. Thank goodness you're back, dear, said Reverend Julian Harmon, greeting his wife with affection and a sigh of content. Mrs. Bird always tries to do her best when you're away, but she really gave me some very peculiar fish cakes for lunch. I didn't want to hurt her feelings, so I gave them to Tiger Pileza, that's their cat. But even he wouldn't eat them, so I had to throw them out of the window. And your tooth, dear, do you have it seen too? Yes, said Bunch. It didn't hurt much. I went to see Aunt Jane again too. Ah, dear old thing, said Julian. I hope she's not failing at all. Not in the least, said Bunch with a wry grin. The following morning, Bunch took a fresh supply of chrysanthemums to the church. The sun was once more pouring through the east window, and Bunch stood in the jeweled light on the chancel steps. She said very softly under her breath, "Your little girl will be all right. I'll see to that, I promise." Then she tidied up the church, slipped into a pew, and knelt for a few moments to say her prayers before returning to the vicarage to attack the piled-up chores of 2 neglected days. Okay, that was a cute story. Okay, with these short stories, of course, you don't really have a chance of solving them. Like, how were you supposed to know that there was a child called Jewel living in that village and all of that? I called the bluff of the Eccles's, though, I mean, that was pretty obvious. And I thought that Gladys was probably used to exchange the suitcases. But, okay, I hope you enjoyed this video, but I guess this doesn't really work out as a format. I mean, this story was only 26 pages long, and it took me about 50 minutes to read it to you. I mean, maybe this is not exactly something I can do in the future, especially considering you don't really get all the information you would need to like solve the cases in these short stories. But anyway, I still hope you enjoyed this video. If you have some idea of how I could make content about the Miss Marple novels as well, let me know down below, because I can't really try to solve them again on camera as I have read them before. I can maybe give it a try in this format that I talked about in the beginning of this video, that I only read like parts of the book and then I already like talk to you. But again, I don't know if that makes sense. So definitely let me know your thoughts, your ideas, and I hope you enjoyed this either way. See you in the next one. Bye.